Welcome back. It seems that last week there certainly appears to be a degree of confusion about what this kind of out-of-the-box obsession I have is about. And it's not about the promotion of spending huge amounts of money on hardware. Out of the box for me is about getting away from the way in which computers like us to work, which is why I really admire individuals like Doris Jamin, an amazing girl who makes these fantastic YouTube videos using stuff that she's picked up from junk shops, pawn shops, second-hand stores, charity stores, that kind of thing, which I always maintain for us samplists are our mecca. But for this kind of out-of-the-box idea also can be a place of rich findings. There are many ways into media composition, some up through the ranks, maybe assisting composers, a very common route, but also there are kind of recording artists, say for example Johnny Greenwood or Olafur Arnalds, who've come up the ranks as an artist and have diversified into media music. There are also some recent examples of media composers who have released albums, artistic endeavours, hugely successful. Michael Price springs to mind. If you haven't checked out his album that he released last year, I humbly recommend you do so. Absolutely fantastic. So I'm curious about becoming an artist from kind of being a craftsperson primarily, but also wondered what the kind of true financial ramifications of, say, self-releasing an album. Is this something that I've wanted to do with this Unboxed project, to get away, yes, from the way that computers like us to work, to try and create music that is slightly different, more organic, to give myself a challenge? And I wanted to frame that in some kind of venture. And so an easy route for me is to create an album, but also it's a kind of an adventure because it'll be a first for me. But I want to truly know, not for kind of people who are having a midlife crisis like me, but for people starting out, is creating music, is creating an album a viable source of revenue? Is it good for one's career? Can you make it work commercially without maybe having a record deal, or without maybe wanting to go on tour and to make money out of merchandise and live shows? So I'm going down to London, one, to take this to its new, very worthy home, but also to talk with a chap called Will Evans, who happens to be the CEO of Spitfire Audio, but is formerly a record label boss and someone who has a fascination with magnetic tape and vinyl. Just want to go and chat to him about the viability of this kind of project beyond it being an adventure for my ego.
We've spoken about this very briefly before, but basically I'm wanting to make an album. And I'm in a kind of an interesting position because I've done quite a lot of soundtracks and stuff. I probably could go out and get a record deal if I wanted to, and I have a production music output and all of that kind of stuff. But I thought it would be interesting to actually just do, I don't know if you call it self-publish like you do with books, or just to make my own recording. And I'm just wondering, is this a viable thing that people can do that makes them money?
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes is,
well, that's
yeah,
good news.
yeah, yes is the answer. And I'd say now more than ever. Now, with social media, with the internet, the access directly to big communities is a thing that artists have today that 30, 40 years ago they didn't. You know, when you started out as a band in the 70s, the only way for your music to kind of get heard beyond your town was to go there and play. Even by that point, as a starting out band, you wouldn't have been pressing records and things like that. So you had to do the very manual work of going to the people. Mm-hmm. And now, all the people are there, and it becomes a case of, okay, how do I start to build a community around myself? And so, like with your channel, you know, that in itself demonstrates that 2 years ago, you know, you decided to start a vlog. Now you have a community of almost 30,000 people who are opted in to communicate with you. And that is something that a record label, say 10 years ago, would have been desperate to do. How can we get 20, 30,000 people engaged with this artist? Well, because we're a record label, we have money, we have connections to help expose you to lots of people through magazines, through the radio, through all the different traditional routes. You've done that yourself, essentially. I know it's different. You're not releasing music to them at this point, but it just proves this point of if you've got a voice and a thing, and you can figure out how to connect it to an audience, all the other bits and pieces, the marketing, the promotion, radio campaigns and things like that, that becomes a question of, do you want that to be there to supplement the stuff you're doing directly? And that's normally a question of your ambition. So I think it's still very much the case that if you want to be Adele or Beyonce or anyone of kind of true global fame, you're going to need a major record label. Because to get that much coverage globally, and a key point is to sustain that over a number of records, then you need a very well-oiled and well-funded machine to make sure that your representation in every territory all year long is happening, and there are people working on making sure that your album is being targeted to people in the right way, and that they're listening, that they're buying concert tickets, they're buying merchandise, etc. However, if you're quite happy to have a kind of independent level success, and that can still be selling, you know, hundreds of thousands of records and doing a fair amount of touring and things like that, you can do that. And I've seen it. I know lots of people that have done it, been involved in some myself, where you certainly don't need a major label. You don't need necessarily an indie label company to support you. You could do all of it for the most part on your own, and perhaps by just employing a few people in specialist areas that you think you need particular help. So for example, if you find I have a track and I think this may do well on radio, that's something that still is a kind of gated community. So you still need someone to get it into the radio station. But yeah, going back to your original question, absolutely, mechanically you can do everything you need to produce a record and have it there. And then of course next step is, okay, I want some people to get this to. And so that's where the work and the decision comes back to you as an artist, which is, am I willing to do the work myself to build this audience? Or what the usual assumption is, I'll get signed and someone else will do all this work to help me build my audience.
I think one of the most useful things a manager said to me, I was in a band, and he said, so guys, what's your ambition? And we went, we want to get a record deal. And it's so often that is the case. You know, that's a weird ambition. You want a legal contract, that's your ambition. And you know, he was quite candid, he said, don't you want to kind of fly around the world shagging lots of people and being famous and earning lots of money? I mean, yeah, but you can't, because the contract is a means to an end, but isn't the end in itself. And I think people get kind of hung up on that. Now, this is a piece of string kind of question. It ranges from putting something up on SoundCloud to, I've witnessed oligarchs putting a lot of money into developing maybe a girlfriend or a wife or a husband's career, throwing a lot of money at it. What's a kind of, you know, if someone is starting out, what is a kind of, if there's a standard route that you've seen that's successful and wise, what would that be, would you say, from a kind of throwing cash at it and energy? Having
personally spent anywhere between nothing and I suppose the most I've spent on a record, and I've worked in the indie sphere, is maybe seeing around up to 75,000 all in spent on a record.
Including the actual making of
the entire, like every single component, from making it to manufacturing it to all the components at the other end, marketing, promo, etc. Personally, and this is just me, but I feel like if you can't see that something's happening around a record and you've spent £5,000 on it, I would always be hesitant about spending any more. Which is, lots of people go, surely you have to spend much, much more. And I think it's actually when you peel back what makes records kind of a success or go, as it were. You know, the difference between one that people are listening to and paying for and enjoying lots and one that is just there. I think it ultimately, of course, it's so obvious, comes down to how good it is, which is something that a lot of people are actually not willing to admit. But this is my 9th album and I've spent £1 million. Why aren't we charting? It's like, because it's terrible.
In this day and age, it's quite a complex bit of mental arithmetic that you have to do. Because of the reduction in budgets and stuff, people tend to be working from home, producing records from home, a lot more. So not only do you have to be a creative artist, especially you also have to be a kind of judge and jury and editor, really. And that, for a lot of people, with the high of making music, is quite a difficult thing to overcome and go, hang on a minute, is this actually any good, or am I just having fun?
I think certainly nowadays you can start to see that success as an artist and releasing records tends to come to those that are as equally creative as they are businesslike.
Entrepreneurial.
Exactly. When you're the artist, you're the CEO of your own company. Sure, you've got someone that kind of runs things, and maybe other people, a manager, you know, a publicist, an agent who gets you shows, etc. But at the end of the day, if you don't wake up and see the vision and want to drive this thing forward, they're not going to do it for you. What I've seen a lot is very talented artists, producers, you know, singer-songwriters, whatever shape you take, don't realise that just being able to do the thing fantastically well alone is often not enough. Unless there's a few cases, and it still happens, where if someone is absolutely fully absorbed by the music, and as a consequence, yeah, they're rubbish at business, they don't know what they're doing tomorrow, they can't organise themselves, but what they're creating is on another level. It is normally the natural way of things that a very, very good and capable management team will find them and take up all of that heavy lifting. If you're doing your thing and it's out there and they haven't come, it means you haven't got it. And that is, again, is something that people are desperately unhappy to hear.
And I think it's this weird thing that we have inside of us. I've been dreaming of doing it since I was 5.
Yeah.
And my daughter, well, all 3 of my children have been 5 at some point. I would say it's not the best point to make a firm and fixed career decision. You've run labels and managed artists, but also you worked on the slightly, not the kind of media, you worked in Focusrite from a marketing point of view, so you're very familiar with what I refer to as the other side of the fence, but you've now come across the fence to a business that is largely targeting media composers and composers of instrumental music, that kind of stuff. And I imagine you've observed this kind of route into media composer, which is coming up through the ranks, assisting other composers, all of that kind of stuff, like Hans Zimmer did, or there is the Johnny Greenwood route. Do you have any thoughts about that as someone who's starting out is very interested in doing applied music to picture or game music, but also the opportunities that maybe being a self-released artist can help with?
If you're someone that has what you feel like is an artistic kind of voice, that is, you're as interested or more interested in creating your own original works in a certain style, you know, the things that I would say make you an artist, maybe less of a priority is to make music for someone else's work. You just want to make music for yourself. You want to get out of bed and write songs or instrumental pieces that you think speak your language. Then this is the exciting thing I think about now, and certainly where it feels like the world is moving, which is whatever your journey looks like as an artist, whether it's you're self-releasing, you do 3 albums on your own and you build a fan base, and then you sign to an indie label for the 4th and 5th album, and being able to make that jump to the media composer role. I think nowadays, following the likes of Mika, Hauschka, Johnny Greenwood, like you say, people that are successful artists in their own right, it's now becoming much more part of a conversation, which is, well, who do we bring onto this score? Do we bring someone who we know's got a fantastic repertoire of movies and games and TV stuff? Or can we think about a style we like and look at an artist that's over there, you know, over in that space? Yeah, and doing that thing and bring them on. There is certainly, I think now, the path has been paved, and actually I'm seeing lots and lots of successful artists who have very much their own distinctive sound that are either independently thinking, oh, I'd quite like to have a go at this film stuff, but also directors calling them up and saying, I've been listening to your record in my car, do you want to jump on this score? Yeah. And actually the interesting thing is a bit of a gap in between, which is then some of these artists not knowing actually, and this is what I find fascinating, they turn up for day one on the job and it's actually quite a formal process with lots of history to it. And of course, everything they've been used to, going out into the studio, touring, writing exactly what they want, then they have to kind of reshape themselves a little bit to fit into what the film world needs, which is sometimes, that's fantastic, but we're going to need we're going to need to lop the end of that cue off, so can you figure something else out?
The other thing which I know because I've experienced is it's actually quite difficult to work to brief. Working to picture is something you can have an organic process, like an artistic, I do put my loop pedals on until something appears. Working to picture is not as difficult as working to brief, or coming up with something and then someone going, I really like it, but... And I think that's something that people find very interesting. So I hope you don't mind, Will. I think we have discussed it, and apologies if I've just imagined it, but I'd love you, if it's possible, to kind of mentor me through the process and for us to share it. I think it'd be really valuable with your experience. Brief for myself at the moment is prescribing that I'm not going to write it with computers, because I just believe it'll create a chaos and a tension, and having had the privilege of speaking to true trailblazers like Martin Ware from Heaven 17, the Human League, or indeed Hans Zimmer, this word tension keeps coming into the thing. It's like I wanted to do something, I couldn't quite do it, so something else happened. So that's my kind of brief to myself. What's the next step?
I've had this conversation hundreds of times, I think. The bit I would always say is, and this may be of no use to the vlog, but you kind of mustn't think about anything but the album at this point. For anyone like you that's thinking the same, I'm a media composer, I've done scores and I want to do my own thing, you've probably been exposed to too much of knowing what the end goal and the end business is going to be, and right, how am I going to build something that fits into that? This is writing an album, and this is art. Now it's slightly different if you want a top 10 or if you want the next Eurovision song winner. Then things are a bit more, there should be a game plan. But when it comes to you writing your record, the truest record that is in you, your artistic, kind of pure artistic voice, you just got to shut everything else out, because ultimately nothing else in the world matters. Most of all, how you're going to release it or how it's going to get there.
It reminds me of when you were a kid and you put on a play for your parents and you actually spend the entire day doing the poster.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's exactly that. And I've had, like I say, countless meetings with artists that are talking about the PR campaign around a record before anything's been written. And I think, again, it's that blurring and an understandable one of, well, we want to make sure there's a success and I want to have an audience, I want to be revered, in a year's time. So let's think about how that's going to happen. But I suppose in my experience, I'd start to say, I wonder if the art is now already being compromised by the business success that you want at the end of it. If your goal is I want to sell lots, I want to connect with a huge audience. Exactly, you're trying to fill a gap. You're trying to figure out what product that audience wants to make success. If you're talking about making an album that you love, nothing else matters. It is. And I love these stories of fantastic records that have come about when the people involved in writing them have shut the world out, or actually some very painful thing has caused them to go away. And
I think the coolest song ever written is Green Onions by Booker T and the MGs, and that happened because an artist didn't turn up for a session. Right. Which leads me conveniently on to my final question. What I do detect in in a lot of artists, is the lack of A&R. I think the problem that we mentioned what a record company can do, but we've not touched on A&R, and that does vary from incredible amounts of power. George Martin started out as an A&R person, or just a kind of project management role, scouting and making sure it gets finished. But particularly in the kind of artistic A&R, you hear stuff and you just go, this would be brilliant if it wasn't 7 minutes long. Yeah. So is that something that you have any advice on? Is it about playing stuff to your friends, or
So essentially, I guess I did A&R for 10 years. My finding at the end was, if it's the case that the artist is making that kind of true, pure art form for themselves, that A&R process ultimately becomes irrelevant. If they've created something and then they say, I want to sell 1,000 copies of this, so you're taking the pure art and the commercial, then I think that's where a person that sits in the middle to say, okay, I don't think what is your pure vision is going to connect with 1,000 people that I know about. So perhaps if we chop that 7-minute masterpiece into something that's 3 minutes, we've got a better chance of. So for me, it becomes that A&R is a function of what commercial output you want at the end.
I think that maybe what I'm looking for is less A&R and more amuse, and the way I define amuse is a human motivating factor.
Yes.
Keep going.
Yeah.
This is, you actually often, I think with the muses, you only need them to be in the room.
Yeah, and this is the greatest A&R people I know, and some of the records that they've worked on are just the most inspiring ones. You actually find everything is an incredibly light touch. And these are records that sold millions and millions and millions, and they're just in the room. They're a confidant. They're someone that when someone goes, oh, should I go up or down, that they can look at and they go up. And they go, yeah, I was thinking go up.
Yeah.
That is, for me, that's purest A&R. That is just, it's like a musical friend that makes you feel less isolated in the kind of job of making an album. It's easy for me to say, this is your pure voice, just ignore everything, just go deep. And that's one of the hardest things in the world to do, because that's like, oh, just open up your soul and kind of get it down on paper, which is the same when you talk to authors and you talk to film writers, and it's actually when you remove the commercial objective and just say, do you. People go, I really don't want to do me. Can you, I'll do what you want me to. I'll write a jingle, or you want me to compose a score that's similar to this, fine. I'll take that instruction, because that's actually much easier to work with than just staring at myself musically in the mirror and going, okay.
But also that is a trap I think people fall into. They go, I'm going to make my album, so I'm going to copy that person.
Lots of people are very good. Lots of people are very capable musically, and now with tech, it's relatively easy to make a very good sounding demo. So when you actually get right up to the line of imitating someone, to the point you go, oh, this actually sounds quite similar. The song just isn't quite as good, or you're in the waste paper bin.
Well, this is absolutely brilliant, Will. Thank you so much. And if you don't mind, we'll film each kind of little chapter. It's great. And I just thought it should be nice, because you do have your fingers in these pies. If there's an artist you can name that members of the channel could check out that could be inspiring, something new, different.
I became an A&R person really through just being with friends and figuring out how to support their music, and they're an act called, and lots of industry people said, oh, you're crazy for calling them this. It was just their names, which is Peter and Kerry. These are just two very normal people, but who are incredibly talented. And actually, I was reflecting yesterday, they've racked up millions of listens on Spotify. Just two people sitting in a bedroom who said, let's just make some music, because it's fun making music. And it was always carried on in that vein, and actually there was very little A&Ring and very little direction. It was just very organic, and actually they, out of lots of people that I've worked with, connected for their first record, which is on Spotify. We spent, I think, £3,000 in total. So, and that is one of the ones that's still having hundreds of thousands of listens every month. So it's kind of proof that it's doable. It's to have a good thing, and to not really know what you're doing, and to just get it out there, and it is very doable. That success is there, whatever you define as success. But yeah, Peter and Kerry, so I'd check them out.
I don't know if it's because I'm just insanely ignorant, but I found that absolutely fascinating, absolute gold dust. And I really look forward to the different installments of working through the process with Will, and working through the process of creating this album with you. However, when I switched the cameras off, Will said, just from one mate to another, have you not thought of maybe doing a single track, 12-inch, or even an EP before you take on the monumental task of creating an album? So I'm going to ponder that thought. What would be fun about doing maybe a 12-inch or an EP is that I'll be able to take you through the process of self-releasing that much quicker, which may be a better motivation, and I guess also really testing the market for the kind of music I want to create. So more of that soon. Thanks as always for watching. Subscribe if you haven't yet. If you want to be notified the next time I put up a video, ding that bell, and one of those always appreciated if you've liked this film. Thanks again to Will. See you next time.